essentially take that into our work with children and parents or caregivers. So I'm just gonna go over an agenda for today so that we're gonna know all the main points of today's presentation. So first, there's gonna be a little introduction about what I'm doing and what I'm gonna talk about, and a brief introduction of a brief history of neuroscience and how we integrated that into counseling. Then we're gonna review a parenting story, or we're gonna talk about child abuse and intergenerational trauma. So a little bit of a heavy content there. And then we're just gonna discuss the application of neuroeducation for our clients, for counselors, and for advocacy purposes. And then I think we have about 30 minutes of discussion, and Sasha will correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's about 30 minutes. So a little bit about me. As Sasha mentioned, I am originally from Italy. So there I studied psychology and cognitive neuroscience. So this is where I really was introduced to neuroscience. And my focus initially was on mild cognitive impairment and how that can really correlate with early onset of Alzheimer's dementia. So I was really focusing, I was in this research team, and we still cooperated, but I was really focusing on the cognitive aspect and the research aspect of this field. But then something just changed in me. And especially during the pandemic, I have two small children, two young children. And so I was just shocked about how much they were impacted and how everything was so different, like the learning and the fact that they weren't able to be with their friends, be in school and just have like a normal, not normal, but I guess now it's not normal anymore, but just a usual and typical life. And so I really decided to go back to school and focus on therapy, specifically with children and their families, because I was just, like I said, I was really drawn to the reasons why, like their behavior and how everything was impacted by something like a pandemic. And so those are my clinical foci. I specialize in children and adolescents and their families. I'm getting trained in play therapy. I'm at the very basic levels of play therapy training right now. But I tend to use family system as well, because I think that if we treat the child or the children and then we put them in the same sort of dysfunctional family, then it becomes easier for the child to present the same sort of issues after a while. And so I really think that there needs to be more involvement, especially when we talk about therapy with children and with little children. And I also think that there's room for play for adults, because I think we sort of forgot how to play. And so that's something that I really want to focus on. But of course, I use a neuroinformed counseling lens, and sometimes I use, one of my dogs comes into therapy with me. I received the animal assisted therapy certification in Italy, and I just love when one of my pups can come with me in session. And of course, I only do that when the therapeutic path requires that or asks for that, but that can be very stimulating. And then on my side, I was trained, and I'm still getting trained in neurofeedback. I learn something new every day, but that's something that it's really fascinating. So I just wanted to put that out there. So a little introduction about neuroeducation. So I put a beautiful quote by Miller. Feel free to go through this quote, but in my own words, I think that neuroeducation essentially is conveying our knowledge of neuroscientific concept to our clients. So I really think that it's good to provide them the knowledge so that they can make their own choices based on that knowledge. So I really like to use that as an empowerment tool. And I think it also enhances our understanding of the client. So we have, I believe we have a more holistic view if we take into consideration some neuroscientific findings. And here is a brief history of neuroscience in counseling. So essentially, you can see that everything started to come up with when we had the technology to really look at the brain. So once we had that technology and once we could actually see what was happening, we just slowly integrated that information into counseling, essentially because I guess it enhanced our understanding of the behavior. And then in 2000, we have the first mention of neurocounseling in a peer-reviewed counseling journal. And then something that I believe really started to shift our understanding of neuroscience and how we could apply that into counseling was the research domain criteria. So it was created by the National Institute of Mental Health. And essentially what it does is that it provides a database where you can see all the researches about a specific phenomenon through different lenses. So we just look at one thing through via epigenetic lenses, psychological lenses, psychiatric lenses, and all of that. And I think it's really important to do that. And also it teaches us how to do research so that we don't focus just on our subject, but we really focus on everything. We have like a broader view. And I think, again, that is to benefit the client, because ultimately we're just gonna have like a better, a broader understanding of our clients. And then in 2013, we received more funding for research in neuroscience and in just brain research. So that's always a good thing. There are a lot of grants out there right now, so that's always good. And then we see the first mention of neuroeducation in a journal written by Fisher, so that's always good. But essentially, with neuroeducation, we will see later on, a lot of people might already talk about neuroeducation without using neuroeducation as a term. So they might just talk about psychoeducation and still talk about neuroscientific concept into that. So it's something I think that it's still evolving because it's fairly new. So now we're gonna watch this video. If it doesn't start right now, I'm just gonna go back and retrieve it. The video is 7 minutes long, but we're only gonna watch 3 minutes of it. Okay, so let me. Okay, that we should be able to watch it. There we go.
When my son was just 3 years old, I accidentally.
There we go.
When my son was just 3 years old, I accidentally dislocated his elbow in public, and I didn't even know I'd done it. And I'm telling you this because I want to talk about the challenges of parenting while we're dysregulated, and a great strategy to help yourself and your child to re-regulate. So this elbow thing happened on BART, which is the subway system here in the San Francisco Bay Area where I live. And I was riding with him at rush hour, and he had been absolutely screaming, demanding that the other passengers, and they had seats, he wanted them to get up so that we, who did not have seats, could sit down. And he would not shut up. He was like, I want to sit there. I did that hissing mama shush thing. I was like, shh. I was like mortified. And I tried offering him raisins, and I tried reasoning with him, and I tried to distract him with a story, but he kept screaming and struggling. And I was holding onto the bar that runs along the ceiling with one hand, and with the other, I was like holding onto his little sticky hand and trying to keep him upright on his feet, but I couldn't control him. And he flung himself to the floor, and he was kicking and thrashing and screaming even louder. And when people are watching, like right now on Bart in that situation, I was getting really overwhelmed, and I had this big backpack on my back to carry, and my hair was in my eyes, and my glasses were falling off my nose, and I was ashamed, and I couldn't control them, and I was just imagining that everyone was hating us. And I didn't have a word for it then, but I became deeply dysregulated. And this is a super red flag zone for parents. I felt desperate and clumsy, and I couldn't see any options. So I grabbed my son's hand and I yanked him to his feet and held onto him like shackles, all the way home to our stop. So when we drove from the station to our house, he was quiet as a mouse back there. And when I took him out of his car seat, I noticed his face seemed kind of gray. And then over dinner, I finally noticed he wasn't using his arm. It took me so long to notice. So I called the advice nurse, and she said I needed to bring him to the emergency room. And at the emergency room, the pediatrician asked if anyone had swung my son around that day or yanked him by the arm. Well, I had never been more ashamed, and I had to tell her what had happened. And I told her, yeah, I yanked him. And she surprised me, and she told me, don't worry, this happens all the time. It's called nursemaid's elbow. And I guess it's named after nursemaids who took care of naughty kids. And she showed me how to fix it. You kind of like shake the kid's hand and put your hand on the top and then hold their elbow and pop it back in. So that night in the ER, I confessed to the doctor that I really had no idea how to control my son. And he was at the age where he was really testing the limits. And I was afraid to discipline him wrong. I realized that my most angry mom behavior came out when I was afraid what other people were thinking. The preschool teachers, the other parents, the people on the train. She told me about this book called 1, 2, 3 Magic. And I wanted to get it so fast that I just went out and bought the video.
Okay, so if you feel comfortable sharing, what are some of your thoughts about this video? What are some of your reactions? You can put it in the chat, or you can unmute yourself, but just take some time to check in with yourself. And then I'm just gonna wait a couple of minutes to see if something is coming up for you. Otherwise, I will keep going. As a new mom, yeah, this information. And the vulnerability, yeah. Oh, and I didn't see your message, Sherry. I just saw that. Yeah, super familiar. Yeah, it is challenging. So feel free to keep putting things in the chat. Oh, let me see this one. Yeah, the window of tolerance. So yeah, the reason why I put this into this video into the presentation is because one, there are some words that really caught my attention. Some of them shame, like Carly, I hope that I pronounced that right, Carly was talking about. Also the thing that she mentioned, the fact that when she thought she was in the bus in the tram, and she thought that people were staring at her, looking at her, so that really probably shaped the way she responded to the child. And so I really think that parenting is very challenging and doesn't come with a manual, but it's so societal based. We have all of this information. We have the shadows of our parents, our culture, our friends, our community, maybe our religious beliefs, and all of these things behind our parenting and behind the way we respond to our children. So it's not very subjective. You're still your own person in the way you respond, but all of these things, they're just very much present in the way you respond. And they can get you can get easily overwhelmed, especially if those are some of your triggers, like being scared, feeling ashamed. And so that is the reason why I put this video here. So the next session will cover child abuse and intergenerational trauma. I don't have any vivid image or content, but still it is heavy content. So if you need some time to debrief, if you need to just step away, just feel free to do so, because I understand that it can be triggering. So how do we respond to threat? First of all, I just wanted to go over the response that a child might have. I chose this picture because I think it really captured the way a child feels when an adult is mad at them or is threatening them or is just a little upset. And I just really want to highlight the fact that children, they're not really autonomous, especially if we talk about younger ages. So they really don't have a way to escape the situation. So whatever they face, not just the fact that a parent yelling or a parent being upset or a parent being gone from the situation can be super overwhelming, but not just that, but the fact that whatever is happening in the room with the adult, they don't really, they're not capable yet to do everything on their own. So they really have to go through everything that is happening in a survival mode. So they're just gonna go through the information and try to not get the best, but try to make the best out of the situation, because they have this knowledge that they need the adult to survive. So that's really very important, because again, it puts you into survival mode. So we're going to see that there are a couple of ways that children respond to these adults. But one thing that I really want to highlight is the fact that emotionally reactive children can be the parents of the future, especially if nothing has been done throughout the process of growing up. So whatever happened in the survival mode when they were children can happen again when they're adults and when they're the parents. So just to back up a little bit, let's see. I just put out there a little bit of information about the brain. I don't have any, I don't want to put any very complicated concept, because I'm not a neuroscientist. Sometimes I wish I were, but I'm not just yet. And so this is just the very basic information. So if you know these things and just don't want me to go through this, just tell me something and I'm gonna stop. But essentially, I put this image to just show you that we can divide the brain in three main pieces, and this part down here is the very primitive and instinctual part of the brain. It's mostly regulates the sensory motor area, so the way we reach out for something, the breathing capacity and all of these things, and it's very instinctual because it's the one thing that we really need for survival. And then here in the middle, we have the limbic brain or emotional brain, where not only this is where the episodic memories are stored, but we also have that emotional balance that will help us decide whether any information is good or bad, or we get to decide again for survival modes whether we want to be in that situation. So not only we can retrieve the memory of something, but we can also, we look at the memory and we're like, okay, this is something that it's good for me, so I can keep doing that, or this is something that is not, this can be like a dangerous situation, so I want to get out of there. So we really have that that emotional balance based on memory. And also the amygdala is one of the parts of the area that stimulates, is responsible for fear and anxiety, for the fear response. So we can see that it's very instinctual. Again, there's not a lot of logical thinking and stopping and really analyze what's happening. But this part of our brain, the prefrontal cortex, this is very logical. It's the analytical part of our brain. So we, when we need to stop and think about what's happening, this is what we engage. So that's, it is a very long way to go all the way from this part of the brain to this part of the brain. And especially if you think about very intense experiences, as far as like things like abuse, verbal abuse, or just something dangerous like going out and being almost hit by a car. All of these things are very intense. And so when something like this happens, this part is the part that just goes away. We don't do any analytical thinking. So those two parts of the brain, they're the first ones to kick in. So we will see that when something happened when you're a child, and you're put into that situation when you cannot escape, and so your parents might be yelling at you, which can be again very scary. Those two parts retain the memory, and they just the reptilian brain just kicks in and said, okay, we need to survive. And so yeah, this is one information that I wanted to put out there. But I also put this quick image about the sympathetic and the parasympathetic system. So those two parts, they're really, it's one of the two would engage depending on the situation. So when we are put in a situation where we want to fight and go away, everything that is not needed in our body will shut down. So you're gonna have a very dry mouth. You're not gonna be able to swallow. And if you were ever in a situation when you were super anxious and you really didn't know what to do, your heart started racing and your mouth got dry, and you really, to the point that you really couldn't swallow. And this is also connected to the fact that when you're having a panic attack, you might be thinking that you're gonna die because you can't even swallow, and everything is so contracted, because essentially the body is telling you, just get the information that you have in your body. You have to run or fight. So we're gonna get rid of anything that you're not gonna need right now. And so with this, we have this the sympathetic system can really make you feel overwhelmed. But then again, that stimulates a memory response of how was that situation, if the situation was good or bad. And also another thing that I wanted to mention is that when we are, as human beings, when we're posted in a situation that is dangerous and it's physically painful, our brain will just start kicking endorphins so that our body will get numb. So this is the reason why after a while, if we're going through a very painful situation, we don't feel as much. So this is the way our brain really helps us to process the physical pain, so that we still feel the pain, but it's better so that we can somehow survive. And then again, it all goes through a memory response. And I keep stressing about the memory response, and we will see more about that. But I think it's very important to understand trauma through a memory lens. So what are some of the predicting factor of intergenerational trauma? So one is residing with a violent individual. So that makes a lot of sense if we think that when a person is already hyperactivated emotionally, so their sympathetic system is already up here, very stimulated, and there's something else that is coming in, some information like a baby crying, or a child crying, or a child who wants to have a lot of things in the moment. So it's gonna call mommy, mommy, mommy all the time, daddy, daddy all the time. That's just one tiny thing that for other people who are not up here emotionally, it's nothing. But for somebody who has already reached the emotional energy capacity, it's just one thing that is too much for them. And so it makes sense as to why somebody who is already very emotionally hyperstimulated, if you take the yelling of a child, it takes nothing. Like, it's so easy to escalate and become violent. The other thing is being a parent under the age of 21. So if we go back to the structure of the brain, we can see that the prefrontal cortex, the analytical part of the brain, is not really fully formed until the age of 25. And that is the reason why with adolescents, you see a lot of instinctual behavior. So they might be getting into fights. They might challenge the system, or they might challenge the parents, and this is all good. And it's also very instinctual because they don't have that ability. It's not fully formed, that ability to just sit and reflect on what's happening and maybe what is the best situation for something, the solution for something. So that makes sense that if you become a parent under the age of 21, with all the challenges that you might have as a parent, again, it's so easy to become violent or become somehow verbally reactive to your children. Then the other thing is suffering from a mental illness. So although I don't share this language, I do believe that if you already have some obstacles in your life and you tend to be anxious or you tend to be sad all the time, of course, that's when you have children, that's another thing that can put you down. So you might want to just scream at your child to go away because you cannot tolerate the noise, the chaos in your house and all of these things. Or you might just want to run away. So some of the things that we see nowadays is the constant scrolling down on social media or binge watching TV, watching 6 series of a TV show in a day. That's something that it's really easy for you to do if you're already in an emotional capacity. So you don't really want to engage. It's not that you don't want to engage, it's more like you don't know how to engage. So you just want to go away and be detached from the situation. So those are some of the things that we can see with parenting. And so again, with Dixon and all in another review, they saw that all of these factors could lead to poor parenting. And by poor parenting, they meant parents having an authoritarian style. So really the do as I say kind of model. So with that, the child really most of the time has a positive, not positive, but response in the way the parent might want. And that's because it's out of fear. So it's not really, I'm doing this because I don't want to disappoint my parents, but it's more like I'm doing this because I'm scared of what might happen. So again, the child is put into survival mode because again, even though children need to be given a lot of credit for things, we don't give children all the credit for a lot of stuff. They're perfectly capable of doing a lot of things, but the problem is that due to their size and their emotional and cognitive ability, they still need us. So they still know that, like in the deep down their heart, they know that they need us. So that's again an escapable situation. But with all of these things that I'm putting out there, I don't want to convey the message that it's the parents' fault for everything. Because I really think that it's a systemic problem. Because if we look at all the fact that might get a parent to be overwhelmed as an individual. So with poverty, for example, if the parents are constantly worried about putting food on the table, they don't really have the emotional capacity to deal with children, because children need a lot of emotions and they need a lot from us parents. And so if they're put in a situation where they're scared for their children, they don't know if they can feed them every day, they don't know what they're feeding them, because I don't know if you ever been in a food bank or some of the programs that help you get food. Most of the time they just give you bad food, and so somehow it's like you're not important enough to have like food that is not expired, food that is not going bad. So maybe they're already thinking about that, and so they don't have their emotional capacity to do that. Or malnutrition, that's another thing, not to mention all the cognitive problems that go into malnutrition, and we will see a little bit of that later. Systemic racism, that's another thing, because people who constantly receive microaggression, they're already in survival mode. So there's a lot going on just there. So of course they're gonna shape the way they respond to society because of the constant racism is gonna pass on to their children, and that's just basic survival. So what do we really expect from a lot of family? Like, it's not that they don't want to engage with their children, but it's more of a systemic problem. So I will never say that it's the parents' fault. You will never hear me say that. So those are some of the things that I listed here. And so going back to the relationship between children and parents, or infant and parents, I know that Shore talks about mother. He mentioned mother in a lot of his researches, but I really like to think of all caregivers, so I don't really like to focus on the mother, just on the mother. So we really do this dance of co-regulation with our children or with our infants. So when the child cries or an infant cries, and then you have this response from the adult, you can really see that the response is going to be mirrored by the other, the little child. And so if you respond out of fear, the child is going to respond with fear too. If you respond out of anxiety, the child is going to respond with this kind of anxiety. If you respond with nurturing, the child is more likely to have that information that when you are stressed out or when you have a problem, you can reach out to people because people are safe and they're okay to go to, so they will help you regulate your state. But if you're really lacking that information because all that you received was fear and aggression and anxiety, then you don't really know how to relate to people, because even later on in your life, you're gonna think, if I'm stressed out, if I'm anxious, if I'm scared, if I go to a person, the person might attack me. So people are not safe. So this is really something, again, that stimulates our memory response. And that's, again, because the limbic system, which we will see, we saw in the previous picture, you have the hippocampus, which is where you get the information, where you store the episodic memory. You have the amygdala, the hypothalamus, and the thalamus. So all of that helps with retrieving the information. So again, that is gonna really shape the way you respond to other people. And so Shore thinks that because of this memory response, when you don't have a nurturing response from a caregiver early on in your age, you're not going to be able to regulate your emotional experiences. And with that, you're not going to really able to stimulate the right brain communication. And that is the reason why some people cannot relate with other people, because they don't really have that ability, again, to go to other people and to know how to establish healthy relationships, essentially. So with this, Bruce Perry, who is a physician who specializes in children, he really noticed that there was a lack of models that will really address everything and will really address the complexity of child development. And so he created this neurosequential model where he was really focusing on social, cognitive, emotional aspects of the child, so that we, not only we professionals, but also parents or caregivers could understand what was going on for their children, developmentally speaking. So he really focused on the neurohormonal activity and how when there is a disruption in the neurohormonal activity since the pregnancy, there are going to be a lot of repercussion on the behavior. So there are going to be a lot of repercussion on just how we relate with people and how we do things in general in different spheres of our life. So briefly speaking, again, if you already know this information, just let me know. But briefly speaking, when two neurons communicate with each other, they release neurotransmitters. And each neurotransmitter is going to have a molecular characteristics that is gonna convey some information about something. So those three monoamine neurotransmitters, the norepinephrine, the serotonin, and the dopamine, they're really in all of the three brain systems. So their work is very extensive. So we're gonna see monoamine everywhere essentially. So when something happens that really affects the neurotransmitter, one of those three neurotransmitters, we can have a lot of repercussions. And so if we think about the brainstem down here, if something happens during pregnancy or in the early stages of a child's life, and we have this disruption, like we have intense negative experiences, such as even like traumatic birth, like we don't talk about it that much, but a lot of women go through very traumatic birth experiences, and so does the child because he was there and he was present. And so all of these things can really shape the way you will do things in the future. So if you have an adverse experience, that has the ability to modify the neurotransmitters and the molecular characteristic of the neurotransmitters. And so what that means is that if you have like a problem here in the brainstem, you're gonna have a lot of sensory motor problems and impairment. So this is when we have like children who cannot sit still, who cannot focus. So there's not talk therapy that can really address them, because the problem is not that cognitively they don't want to focus on the teacher or focus on what the parent is saying, but they don't have the ability to do so because those neurons, they don't fire enough, and that area is not very developed. So they really lack the ability. So we really need to do something there in the area, like maybe yoga, breathing is some of the things that we can do for anxiety and for this impulse control problem. And so Perry really talks about repetitive pattern that just give you stability. And so this is how that area will get more stimulated. Or if we have problems in the limbic system, we're going to have problem co-regulating or self-regulating, which is some of the things that we saw earlier. And so with that, we really need to do something like art and play therapy so that they can really teach you how you can utilize different things to calm yourself, or you can go to people to calm yourself. And this is where we can add talk therapy. So again, with children, it's a little bit more complicated because we can just talk with them, but we really have to find a way to address this issue through, again, yoga or play or music, theater, that's another good thing. But we also want to tell that to the parents who might not know what's going on with their children. And so this is essentially, I think this is where the neurosequential model done by Perry and the polyvagal theory really converge, because they both talk about being hyperstimulated or overstimulated, and you still end up, whichever way we go, either you're hyper or you're hypo, whichever way we go, you're still gonna end up in a place of uncertainty. So you don't know really why you're feeling in a certain way. So I really wanted to check in and see how everybody's doing. So this is, I put this game here, but feel free to put in the chat if you just if you need a moment. But essentially I chose this little exercise because I think it's really calming. It really takes a couple of minutes to do that. We're not gonna do the whole exercise because I'm mindful of time, but I'm gonna show you how to use that. So this was initially done by Argas and Guerrero, and it's really used the EMDR and play therapy, and I learned that through play therapy. But essentially what you do is you're gonna cross your thumbs and you're gonna put your hands on your collarbone. If you don't feel really comfortable doing that, you can put your hands on your shoulder or arms here. If you still don't feel really comfortable with that, you can put your hands on your legs. So for me personally, I think my shoulder is what works best, and it really calms me down. So again, I'm just gonna show you how to do it, but you're gonna see, at least I can see for myself, that even if I do it for just a couple of seconds, it's really gonna calm me down. So you wanna exhale, inhale, and exhale. And then you're gonna do this until you feel calm enough. So maybe just 3 or 4 times. And then you're gonna stop tapping back and forth. And then you can keep inhaling and exhaling as you do this. You can think of positive affirmation. So words, so just to know that you're worthy of attention and love and nurturing. And you can also think about a safe place. If you don't have a physical safe place, you can imagine of something that is really calming for you, a place where nobody can really touch you, nobody is gonna hurt you, and you're just gonna keep tapping back and forth. And then once you reach that safe place, you can inhale and exhale a couple of more times. So I really love this beautiful exercise because, one, it gives you the impression that you're being hugged. So that already gives you a little bit of the nurturing thing. But also, I don't know if it worked for you, but personally for me, it really works. And that is why I try to do it with my clients as well. So now that we talked about all the research and information taken by the research, what can we do with this information? What can we do with neuroeducation? So with clients, I think first, like I said in the beginning, we can empower them through knowledge, because just like we learn a lot of things in school and we apply that with our clients, but maybe some of these things, like we apply them onto ourselves too. We want to do the same thing with the clients, because ultimately we don't want them to depend on us. So we really want them to learn more about how they can do things on their own. So we just give them this information. We don't have to be very extensive about the whole body and how everything, all the neurons and the chemical things, we don't need to give them that, but just little bits of information to let them know that there might be a biological reason as to why something is happening and you're reacting this way. And in fact, some of the things that I've seen when I explain some of these things with my clients, especially with women, when they ask me, why am I overreacting to my child? A lot of the times we talk about just the several things that are happening. And again, I've seen this mostly with women, but maybe it's because I have more women. I see more women than men at my side, so that could also be a factor. But sometimes I just tell them, if you feel like you have to have a career and you have children and you have to take care of the house, and you believe that you can do so and you can be perfectly functioning after that, that's not really how it's going to work. You're setting up yourself for failure. But society really tells us that you are supposed to do all of these things and you're supposed to achieve all of these things and still be fine, when it's not real, it's not realistic. So we need to stop thinking of ourselves as superhuman beings and just normalize the fact that we are already at capacity, because society is asking us too much, way too much. And so that might be one simple reason why I'm yelling at my child, because I'm just at capacity and I cannot do anything else anymore. But if we go back to the memory response in the context of intergenerational trauma, I really want to convey to the clients that there is a memory reconsolidation problem. So when with PTSD, you see a lot of the times that the client tells you, I don't remember clearly what happened. And one of the reasons why is because they find out that there is an encoding process that is going to be disruptive when you have negative emotional experiences. So you don't really encode what's happening. So normally what happens is that you witness something and the memory is it's gonna go in the hippocampus, and you're gonna be able to retrieve most of it. The memory is gonna change over time, so we also change the telling of a story over time, because it's not gonna be super fresh. But still, when you have such an intense experience, the memory is just, the encoding process is disruptive. So that is why you cannot even retrieve the full thing. So when you don't see where you're challenging, where you're fighting against, you know that your child is yelling and it's very triggering, and you don't even know why you're yelling too. But maybe it's because it's triggering something within you, and you're not able to see them because you don't have all the parts ready for, like, to build the puzzle, essentially. So I think that's one of the things that we really need to convey to our clients. Also, just having this information for corrective emotional experiences, and just seeing what's happening in the room with the client. Like if you see the client crying after, like, you told them this, you told about this thing, like, it's something that is going to help you. It's going to give you more information about the client and what's happening in the room. So for a counselor, other than the things that I already said, I think it can provide a reframe of the mental health diagnosis, because although we're taking a lot of information from the medical model, I don't feel like we're really using that in a medical way, but it's more so we're trying to have a holistic picture of the client, and do that, like, have that information so that we know more about the client. So we're not taking that information because we want to provide medicines or things like that. We just want more information about the client, essentially. Also, I think the fact that this knowledge gives us the opportunity to target different parts of the brain. Like Dr. Perry was saying, we can do repetitive activities in order to calm down the nervous system. So if the child is very disruptive and keeps interrupting you, and he keeps bouncing off the walls, there's no talk therapy that is really going to address that. So just knowing that should be helpful for both for clinicians, but also for parents and caregivers. And so the consistency and the repetitive pattern activities that I was talking about that he mentions. And then here are some of the interventions that we already have. So even though neuroscience applied into counseling and psychology is relatively new, we still have a lot of interventions that we can do with that. So I listed some of those here. But again, I think I just want to caution everybody about the use of neuroscientific concept into counseling and psychology, just because, again, it's new. So I personally don't want anybody to feel like neuroscience has all the answers, because it's just something that we keep discovering over time. So we're just going to apply some of the knowledge that neuroscientific research gives us, and we're going to apply that into counseling, but definitely it doesn't have all the answers. So it's just some more, it's just another lens for which you can do counseling. And then I just wanted to spend a couple of minutes. I know that we have about 10 minutes, so I'm just going to be brief. I think neuroeducation in the context of neurofeedback, but because I use neurofeedback in my site, I really think that we can really use the benefits of neuroeducation with our clients, just to build rapport and to tell them, okay, this is what you need. Because with neurofeedback, I don't know how familiar you are with it, but essentially you have the wires are going to be applied on your scalp, and then the client watches a movie, and they're going to receive a feedback through the screen, because the screen is going to shrink or it's going to get bigger, and the sound is going to go up and down. So you really get that information from the screen. but you can see that you're attached to a machine and there are wires on your scalp. So this sounds very medical. So I wonder, this is not something that has been proven, but I wonder personally how many parents come into the site where I work and they want to have neurofeedback sessions for their children, and they think that all the solutions are going to be within the neurofeedback session just because it's something that sounds more medical. And so I think it's really good to apply the knowledge that comes from neuroeducation and just tell them this is what's happening. There might be why it's happening. So those are some of the things, extra things that we can do. So we can also use neurofeedback to just sort of recalibrate the brain waves so that you might act in a different way. But essentially, I think it's important to just give that understanding to parents, or to parents who come in for their children, or to parents who want to do something and they have children. And so we're just going to explain them more about what's happening in that situation. The other thing, it's something that I'm particularly interested about, it's neurodiversity. So I think I'm currently researching neurodiversity right now, and just how just focusing on ADHD and autism right now. I really think that there is a lot that we don't know about that, and we also live in a very neurotypical world. So there are a lot of times we see that children, maybe their families and their teachers and the school really demand something from them that they cannot give. And that's not because they're not smart enough, but it's because their brain is functioning in a different way. And I think now, thankfully, we're coming to that knowledge where we're okay with knowing that the brains are different and they function in a different way. But still, I don't think there are enough resources out there to allow everybody to be okay and to thrive in a neurotypical world. And so I think this is where neuroeducation can really help with understanding brain diversity. Essentially, we can go out there in the community and just tell the schools how the brain is different and what's happening in the brain. Also, one of my curiosities is, I know the research shows that the reason why there are more cases of neurodivergent kids is because of the chemicals in the food that we eat and the air that we breathe. And so because of that, we'll see, I have another slide here, we will see them the barrier that protects the brain weakens, and so we don't really have the brain doesn't have the power to face all the chemicals that are coming into our body system, and so we see more autoimmune problems. And with that, the brain just shapes, the neurotransmitters just change, and the communication just changes. So that is not to say that everybody's going to be neurodivergent, but I keep wondering how are we changing the brain with all the things that we're eating and the air that we're breathing? Like, are we really shaping all of these brains and then expecting that we're all going to work in the same way? So that is why I put that out there. So it's a lot of I think I have a lot of questions personally about what's happening right now and the reason why we see this drastic rise in children who are neurodivergent. And so that makes me think about all the minorities and all the people who are not seen from the system. Again, when I found out that at the food bank, they don't give food that is really good. Like sometimes, yes, they do, but sometimes they give you like food who is expired, or things that are not really good for yourself, or just the cans. There are a lot of chemicals in canned food just to preserve the food, and so all of these things really don't help you, don't help your body, and so you're gonna react in a different way, and you're gonna have all of these behavioral problems that are caused by the food that you're eating. And so I really think that, again, it is our power to go out there and inform people and legislators and so on, so that maybe they can do something about it, because we're literally poisoning people because they don't have resources. And so that is why I think that we can do a lot for advocacy and social justice, not just with our clients in the session. I think that within this counseling session, the one-on-one session, we can really empower the client, so that the client, if it is within their power and their personality to go out there, they can fight. But if it's not, I really think that we can have a voice. So it's not something that everybody has to do. You can do whatever feels comfortable for you. You don't need to go out there and fight all of these things. Me personally, I build the tolerance to what I can do. Like I started very slowly, and then I'm adding more advocacy things as I go, just because it can be very emotionally draining. So I'm not saying that everybody has to go out there and fight, but that's just an information that I wanted to put out there. But this is essentially what I was talking about as far as the gastrointestinal system and how it's connected to our brain. And also just all the workshops that we can do. Again, we can go out there in the community and just talk more about this so that everybody can know. And then that is why I put, is change possible? That's again, because I believe that families are not, they don't have unhealthy relationships because they chose to do so, but more because they were put into that kind of situation. So again, we're not trying to say that parents are bad by any means. We're trying to say maybe they were put into a situation where this is all they could do. So how do we change the system so that parents themselves have more tools and resources to fight all this? And again, that can come from us, our voice as counselor, or we can empower the client. And also the Maslow hierarchy of needs, I keep thinking about that essentially because there is no talk therapy that is going to work if your client doesn't have food, if your client doesn't have money. We can talk about safety, but before we even talk about that, if the child feels safe or the parent, the individual feels safe going to a person and talk about that, there's none of that happening if your client is lacking the basic things, because one, they have more important worries, more important things to worry about. So they cannot be out there and talk to you about safety. Two, they might not even come to you because as of now, I think to the best of my knowledge, there are some programs that really help you get free counseling or low fee. But some people might not have the time. If you're working like 60 hours a week, you're not gonna have time to go to a counselor and talk about safety or social needs. Or if you work 60 hours a week, or even 40 hours a week, but you're still lacking the money, the counselor is not going to be the first thing that is popping up into your mind. And so this is within our power to make things more accessible. And also, I think we can also demand more fundings for just mental health, essentially, because I'm not saying that you have to do your work for free, because we all need to work, but maybe there needs to be more grants, more free nonprofit things, more funding from the government and all of these things, so that we can really help parents and their families. So for the sake of time, I'm just gonna briefly go over this. This is one of my research studies, and I'm currently looking into this, and it's based on the neuroeducation toolbox. So essentially just I just want to see how this information is going to help parents, because I think we don't have a lot of strong evidence that neuroeducation works, because neuroeducation in particular is very, very recent. So we don't have a lot of research about that. In fact, we have a lot of people who criticize neuroeducation by saying that it can be very reductionistic. It really reflects the medical model. But again, I think all of this information can really help you understand more about the client, and it can just be used with a wellness perspective. And also, just like anything new that comes out, it's gonna come with a storm. You're gonna be facing challenges and you're not gonna know exactly if it works or not. But I think it's really worth to explore more about neuroeducation and its potentials. But one thing that I wanna stress out is that you're not gonna be a professor teaching the client about neuroeducation. So this is not something that you decide one day and you decide, okay, I'm gonna go over this information with my client. Just like with any other thing, you should wait until the time comes. So if you feel that your client really needs to have this information about how the brain works, then you can explain some of the things, and you don't need to just put all the information all at once onto the client, because that can be very overwhelming. And actually, in my references, I also mentioned a study. I can't recall the name right now, but it's in my references, where they found out that this information about how the brain works can actually lead to hopelessness, because they might think that because it has biological basis, there's nothing that can be done other than having medication. And so you really have to be careful about you use neuroeducation. Again, neuroscience doesn't have all the answers. And for some clients, it might be beneficial to hear about this. For some other clients, it might not. So you really need to pay attention to your client and how they're responding to this information. And in fact, I just put the ACA Code of Ethics so that you can see that we want to avoid harm, but we also want to try to benefit the client with this information that might be, again, beneficial for them. But also we can do so in a very ethical way. So of course, you will need to have some basic information of neuroscience and neuro-informed counseling, so that you can really give explanations that are based on research, and they're maybe not necessarily evidence-based, because as of now, I think we're lacking a lot of evidence-based information on neuroeducation. And again, this is my call for, we need more of that. But you can feel free to do so. And there are a lot of courses out there for neuroeducation or neuroinformed counseling. Just type in, I might have the links of a few programs about neuroinformed counseling, but if you type neuroinformed counseling courses, there are a few out there that can give you more information about it. And so thank you for just listening to me. I hope this wasn't too overwhelming and it wasn't too much information all at once. So those are those are my references, but I'm gonna stop sharing for now.